So this is our last PowerPoint audio. I know you guys will miss me and I'll miss you too, but I just want you to know these take some time in preparing, even when you don't practice. So this should be an easy chapter because it's all about personal selling and sales management, for which you've had a completely separate text and set of lectures around that topic. So let's just treat this as a review. Obviously, there's advantages of personal selling. One of the things that it doesn't talk about really in your sales book is that personal selling is an integral part of a push strategy. In other words, how to push it into a product into the marketplace, as well as an appropriate technique for dealing with products around which there are complex decisions to be made. So when you have those two things in place, personal selling is a necessary choice. And one of the things that we seek to do with personal selling, again, is to develop relationships. Whether it's a relationship, even, and I think companies often forget this, we think about in the context of somebody who sells software to businesses, for example, that's a good example where it's key to have a relationship over time, or you're not going to do well because the needs change, products change and vary. But it's also true for consumer products like insurance, for example, uh, where you want that customer to become sort of part of a family, a general family that you capture and have a relationship for an extended period of time, often uh, around a bundle of different products. So that's another easy identification of a sales product, or a product where a relationship is integral over time if you're going to make money over time. But it's also something that's ignored in other products, such as the sale or purchase of an automobile. Um, it used to be that people bought an automobile about every 3 years, but the Japanese changed that in the 70s when they started building really good cars intended to last 100,000 miles or more. So now the turnaround time on a car is more like 5 to 7 years. Um, and so it really makes sense, and it's not really well done for operation to maintain a customer base where they intend to stay in touch with you over a 5 to 7 year period. That's often the case where the salespeople themselves and the organization themselves lose interest, but there's a real opportunity that's lost by not engaging at key points in time, especially when you consider a life stage cycle where people's needs may well change and you want to stay in touch with them on that basis so you can engage yourself in their decision process on a timely, regular basis. So again, uh, the process is all about generating leads, qualifying them, assessing what their needs are, developing solutions, handling objections, closing the sale, and follow up. And again, I'd say follow up is can be viewed as follow up over time. It's just not the first thing you want to deal with is cognitive dissonance, and so you want to follow up right away. Everything working okay, but just like Apple, re-engage yourself on an ongoing basis to make sure that the product is meeting their needs and whether or not they need any additional help or service around the product service, even if that extends like an automobile into over a 5 or 7 year period. Now, your sales text really views it for the most part from the perspective of the salesperson, but it's worth taking a look at sales from a management perspective. How do you manage different sales units? And again, I wrote what I still consider to be a decent article for Real Estate Today years ago uh, on establishing or developing business strategies. And what I said is, I wrote a business plan as an owner operator, and one of the things that I insisted on is that my salespeople write a plan as well. So if you're in a management situation, you want to set your objectives, increase sales by X percent, X amount in dollars, X amount in units, whatever. You quantify those objectives through a given time period. But you can turn in it. Let's say you want to, that your objective as the manager is to sell 100 units through the next year, and you've got 5 salespeople that work for you. You want them to write a business plan as well and identify their objectives around that particular item, how many units as an individual they intend to sell, how they intend to do it, and then that you can evaluate their plans to the extent that they actualize or meet your own objectives. So one thing's for sure, if you've got 5 salespeople and your overall objective is 100, then those individual objectives better add up in terms of their targets to 100. So this is exactly what I was just talking about. Set goals. I make I distinguish between goals and objectives. Um, and I think objectives, again, are quantified, whereas goals are more general. But the book treats them the same, so you can do it whatever way you're comfortable with. At the end of the day, whether you call it a goal or an objective, it ought to be quantified, it ought to be stated in terms of um, time periods, and they should be achievable, inspirational, etc., etc. So you can set up your Salesforce uh, along different constructs. They can be regional allocations. You can assign different product lines to different people. Uh, there's all kinds of ways of doing it. Company size, so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, your sales force should be composed of a group of people who are a unit and who can meet again the objectives, have all the personal qualifications and characteristics that would allow you to meet your stated objectives. Now, an important element in managing a sales force is how you're going to compensate them. And for those of you that are already in sales, you know that there's a number of different ways to do it. If you want to go into the real estate industry, you're going to go right into, in most cases, not in all cases, it might vary from company to company, but usually you'll go right into a compensation structure where it's commission only. If you were to go to work, however, for something like an insurance company out of college, it's probably a combination of salary and commission, wherein their objective is to move you in over a given time period into a completely commission-driven plan. In most cases, though, they want to get you to work on a commission basis for the very simple reason that that is a motivator in and of itself. If you're going to set metrics of objectives, then you want those metrics that you set become the objectives and the means for evaluating your sales force. Like I said earlier, what I had my salespeople do was to write a sales plan for themselves. And so if it's, again, real estate, and you want to increase your volume of listings by X amount and your volume of sales of listings by X amount, then that's how the salesperson should state their objectives, and you have a metric by which you can evaluate them. So you could say, well, you said that you were going to make 30 cold calls a week, and by your own admission, you've only made 15 for the last 2 months. That might be fine if in fact they ended up meeting their numbers, but if they didn't meet their numbers, their increased listings, sales, whatever, new customers, then that's a metric by which you might hold them accountable and maybe going forward enforce in an effort to determine whether or not you were going to keep them on, or to somehow help them become more effective. Maybe it's an issue for them of confidence or whatever, so you maybe additional training would solve it. But again, when you have those kinds of things in place, almost an implicit agreed upon contract between you and them, then it becomes a way to both manage them as well as to hold them accountable in their individual operations. Now, one of the things that you want to do, obviously, is to capture as much um, customer data as possible. And you want to make sure that you warehouse that information around customers, which means they have information around their customers, but you want to make sure you have that information as well, that uh, they're not necessarily hoarding it. And that's important because they might feel it belongs to them and you determine that it belongs to the company. So nobody should be indispensable. So if anything happens to that salesperson, whether they leave, die, whatever, that you have that information available to you so that someone can continue to follow up on it. So this last chapter, social media marketing. And everybody is familiar at this point with social media. It's just like your social media plan should be a component of your overall marketing plan. And just like your advertising component or public relations component or sales component, you should clearly define what it is that you intend to accomplish by having a social media presence. Just having one in and of itself is not strategically recommended because there's all kinds of problems that can come as a consequence of that. So you want to say, what can I accomplish with social media, and based upon my target market, which of the platforms, whether it's Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat, whatever, which one of these is most appropriate for me to communicate with my target market or my intended target market around my particular product. There's different kinds of things that you can use: social networks, blogs, microblogs. in promoting your product or service. Uh, you can use those platforms or media for a number of different things, whether it's exchanging information or uh, monitoring how your customer is using your product, what is their opinion or perspective of your product, so forth and so on. And part of the challenge is to facilitate conversations with them that answer the questions that you want answered. As well as listening to what their concerns are. Consumers use social media for a number of different reasons. I'm not a social media user. I find it intrusive, but that's probably because of my age. Um, but it's still a groaning, a groaning. Maybe it is groaning. It could have been psychological. Still a growing media. Millennials, more and more people, more and more age groups are very, very comfortable with social media. Millennials using 2 hours a day on average on their smartphones for social media. Uh, I find it frustrating in how people will send me texts about things they want an immediate decision on rather than call me, as if I'm monitoring my text messages that closely. The age of, it seems though that just calling somebody and asking them is waning. So there are several really significant, whether you're a social media fan or not, several really significant media advantages for a business or a service to use social media. And again, you can have conversations with your consumers. You can monitor their feelings around certain things. You can pull in new potential users into the conversation. It's a great tool for building brand loyalty around certain products or services. Um, and you can collaborate around new ideas with consumers about how your product might be used or what complementary products would seem to make sense. One of the things that you hear about social media is that it's free. It's not free. Uh, if you're going to do a good job with it, you have to have somebody in charge, and that whoever that you put in charge with it, whether it's you or somebody else, it takes time, and in that sense, it's not free. You're going to have to pay somebody, or you're going to have to expend your time, which is a resource, to do a good job. So one of the things I made the comment about text messaging. One of the things about people who use social media is they're engaged with it just constantly, and so whoever is in charge from your standpoint has to be engaged with it constantly as well, because you should listen to what's going on a regular basis, because it changes. The conversations can morph and change so quickly. And so make sure uh, that if you're initiating a social media campaign, that you've got an individual or individuals who are constantly engaged in in any conversations and the management of your presence on social media. And I'm not going to go through this again. It's interesting though, that simply to point out that it is essential to understand who these people are that are using social media. Which ones are your target customers? Are they all your target market, or only a portion of your target market? And how do they engage? Why do they engage? What is their personal, individual use of this media? And so this is worth taking a look at, about how they categorize media users. And this should help you answer the question, how am I going to use this media for my own? How does it fit with my promotional objectives, my marketing objectives? Microblogs are good if you've got the audience. They're not applicable or appropriate for all uh, products or services, but as I was mentioning earlier, if you're going to have a blog to engage with your customers, it's something that you have to deal with on a regular basis. In many cases, the blog has to be updated daily if it's conversation issue driven. If it's product driven or brand driven for a kind of a medium sized brand, you could probably get away with updating it weekly, but you have to keep them fresh regardless of following. And so again, that takes a person's attention or time, and it has to be someone who understands the media uh, and someone who can write a coherent sentence in many cases. So again, I told you that when you start a promotional campaign, you want to always ask yourself, I've emphasized this over and over, what am I trying to do? What is my uh, goals or objectives with instituting or initiating, in this case, this particular media? Am I trying to increase awareness, target audiences, promote products, uh, get new relationships, whatever? But you should state these because and have a clear idea of how you're going to measure the extent to which you're achieving them. Otherwise, you just have a presence there, and if you don't have objectives in mind, with social media in particular, it's dangerous because you can be perceived in many different ways. Just having a presence for the sake of a presence it's just not good. It's dangerous.